Someone asked, and you probably would ask, like, why Altadena? Why would you move back there? I can't imagine, like, no other place. It seems as though the city of Pasadena, Altadena raised us, because of my dad and the roots that he had there. It's just home for us. It's home for me and my siblings, period. My name is Dana Brumfield. I am a mom and a grandmother. I work for Pasadena Rosebud Academy. We are a higher ranking charter school that was founded in 2007 by Sean Brown, my sister in law, and Joseph Brumfield, my brother. I was literally born on Lincoln in Pasadena. My dad moved us to Wapello. He was a single dad at the time, raised me and my brother from the time I was 7. And today I'm 58. So that just gives you a little bit of that history. My father purchased the home probably around 1974. I've kind of put it together recently that maybe he loved Altadena because of the country feel. Well, he was from Louisiana, a small city outside of New Orleans. And I used to go there for the summers. I had to go and stay with my grandmother out there. And it gives you that feel, the trees, no sidewalks. That's Altadena. So it reminds me of Louisiana. I moved out when I got married, but I always went there, I always went up there with my dad. So my dad passed away in 2016. And shortly after that, I moved into the home, totally renovated the home because it needed some work. And one daughter and her husband moved into the back because she was starting a family. And then later on, my younger daughter moved in, and then she ended up having a daughter. And in 2020, I think, my daughter ended up having her youngest son there. She delivered him right in the bathroom across from where my dad passed. So we often think of that. Life was brought into that home. Life went out and life came in. It's just never, ever want to do anything with that property other than keep it in our family. So I think that's why I get so emotional about it because I don't think people get it that all your stuff is gone. My daughter, she's like, Mom, when I was leaving, it just looked like big balls of embers falling just from everywhere. And so she said she just laid on the horn because she didn't know if other of our neighbors were hearing what she heard. The next day, my kid's dad made it up there and he called me and said, Hey, it looks pretty bad. I can't get through to your house, but it looks pretty bad. I know he knew, but he didn't want to tell me on the phone. So my daughter ends up going up there and I'm headed up there. So she literally calls me and she's like, "They're just hysterical, Mom. Our house is gone." I threw my phone because it just hit me so hard that it cracked my whole front window. I threw my phone that hard. That's just hysterical saying my house is gone. It's gone. It wasn't that Wapello's house was gone. It was Altadena was gone. I'm born and raised there. So that night, parents were sending us video of the school sign on fire. And it was crazy, like seeing that our Rosebud sign was on fire. And I was like, can this be real? Not even thinking. I don't know why. I live one block below. I'm not putting together that the school is on fire. That's coming down your way. They started Rosebud 18 years ago. So we started with 11 kids, 3 employees. We were up to over 200 students and 30 employees.
It's a high-functioning charter school that caters to Black and brown students to close the achievement gap. I was hit from all ends. And so I haven't really been thinking about what I lost. I just been thinking about the next move. And with the school, I just so much. I do it for my kids. I do it for my grandkids because, they don't deserve this. And so I can't be angry about it. I'm sad about it, but I'm not angry. I just think that in the time, everything will work out. I don't know what it looks like to rebuild. I really don't. There's issues with soil that we don't know about. I'm not going to be on the front end of that. I want to know what's going to happen to the place that I know was home in Altadena. I'm already getting quotes at 1.2 million to build back because of the materials. I didn't owe anything. So how does that make sense? Make it make sense. So you see, we're so early into this. It's hard for me to say, yeah, I'm going to keep saying all day long, I want to build my house back. But what is that really going to look like? One characteristic of me, of my own, is empathy. So when I see, especially elderly people that may be displaced from this fire and may not be able to go home because time is not going to be on their side, it kills me. I try not to think about it because I feel other people's pain and not just my own. I'm going to be okay. I know that. I know me. I know my girls. I know we're going to be okay. I don't know if folks mentally can deal with some of the things that I know we've had to do and keep it pushing. I wish that for folks. I really do.
In covering this disaster over the past 10 months, it's clear that most people's insurance is not going to be enough money to build a brand new house. That means thousands of survivors are in limbo right now as they try to figure out how to make a rebuild work. For Eaton fire survivors, though, there may be money on the way. That's because all evidence points to SoCal Edison equipment as the source of the deadly fire. From Los Angeles Times Studios, this is Rebuilding LA. I'm Kate Cagle. So let's start with the caveat here. The official investigation into the cause of the Eaton fire is not over. SoCal Edison, though, has already said that it likely sparked from their equipment. Edison is facing dozens of lawsuits from survivors and even from the U.S. Department of Justice, accusing them of not only starting the fire, but of negligence. And that might influence just how much our guest today can say, but we are still going to ask the CEO of Edison International the hard questions. Pedro Pizarro is here to talk about how SoCal Edison is trying to make it right with a wildfire recovery compensation program. Thank you so much for being here.
Kate, thanks for having me.
I want to start with the fact that you are a part
Yep.
of this community. You and your wife live in Pasadena. SoCal Edison has employees who lost homes in the Eaton fire. How have you wrapped your head around the magnitude of what happened there?
I don't know if any of us will ever be able to wrap our heads around the magnitude of this, Kate. And my wife and I have been here for 37 years. She grew up in Southern California. We met in college, and then I chased her here for grad school at Caltech. And so we've been here for 37 years in this community. We know so many people who've been impacted. As you said, we've had 17 Edison team members who lost their homes in the Eaton fire, 2 who lost their homes in the Palisades fire. The Caltech community where my wife works, I was on the board there till recently, over 300 folks lost their homes between Caltech and JPL. So I don't know that we can wrap our heads around this, But I want to make sure that as a company, we are doing the right thing for our community. We're learning from this, and we're helping the community move forward faster.
The official cause of this fire is still under investigation. So I'm curious, why start the compensation fund now and not wait for that official cause?
Here's why, Kate. We've said already in our financial disclosures, right, that there is concerning circumstantial evidence. There's no other clear probable cause. The investigations continue, but typically these complex formal investigations can take 12 to 18 months. And then, meanwhile, you have thousands of folks who have been impacted. Many have already filed lawsuits against Southern California Edison. And so, typically with litigation like that, it doesn't make much sense to go through the time and expense of jury trials. So we often see if we can find a meeting place in terms of settlements. So because of all of that, we've already said there's a probable loss here. The probable loss will be covered by $1 billion of customer-funded self-insurance. And then beyond that, it would tap the state's wildfire fund that was funded half by customers, half by shareholders of the investor-owned utilities in the state. And if we do this well and in a way that attracts more of the folks who've been impacted, that's going to help lower the cost for them. It means, fewer months in a rental place. It means less exposure to cost increases from inflation in materials and labor costs. Hopefully, it also means lower legal costs. Right? And so you take those costs out of the system for them. You also take those costs out of the system for the customers who are funding half of the wildfire fund that's going to pay for all this ultimately. And then above all, we're helping people rebuild their homes and rebuild their lives faster. And those people include, hopefully, the 17 Edison team members who lost their homes. It's a total of, I think, over 60 Edison team members who are in properties that are eligible for the program. It includes many people we know, our neighbors. And like you said, Kate, this is my community. And I want to be able to walk into the supermarket and look a neighbor in the eye, and they might agree or they might disagree with what we're doing. But I want to be able to look them in the eye knowing that our company is trying to do the right thing.
And I want to be clear, this is already up. So right now, everyone who was impacted by the Eaton fire can go on the website and start the process, but they don't have to commit until
Absolutely.
they see the offer, correct?
Fully voluntary all the way to the end. You don't have to make any commitment to participate. And you can go through the initial process. The first track is, we call it the fast pay process. So once somebody has a substantially complete application, SCE will provide an offer within 90 days or less. And if the individual accepts that offer, once it's notarized, signed, they will have their proceeds within 30 days or less. They might not agree with that fast pay offer. They might think that there is more detail that they needed to provide that was not called for with this initial process. It's a model-based process, again, designed to be fast. We think it'll help many or most, but it won't help everybody. So there's a subsequent detailed review option, which could take as long as 9 months. But then that would allow impacted folks to provide more information, to make a different case that might go beyond the model. And again, up to 9 months. With if they accept the offer, then their proceeds coming in within 30 days. So, my simple message, as I've done town halls in the community in person and virtually, has been check it out. There's no obligation. Just check it out. And by the way, you can check it out with assistance from an attorney if you choose. You don't need an attorney. You can check it out on your own. Just check it out. If you use an attorney, we'll give you a 10% premium on the net claims portion. Already, we've been pleased to see some early participation.
Now, if you've signed on to a lawsuit already, you can also stay on that track for now, but then eventually you have to make a decision, one or the other.
Right, absolutely. This is meant to be a complete settlement of liabilities. And so individuals or businesses are eligible. They could have already filed a lawsuit and participate in this program. They could decide to file a lawsuit in parallel with it. They don't have to stop any of that. Again, check it out. And they can just go through our process and decide at the very end. If you accept the offer, this is a full settlement, right? And so, yes, we're asking folks in signing up for an offer to then waive any future rights, because this is meant to bring finality and certainty, to both sides. I should also say, Kate, that we didn't design this in isolation by ourselves. In fact, our initial ideas for what this would look like were very different from what we ended up putting out there. Two big sources of help in that. First was that we engaged the architects of the 9/11 Compensation Fund and a number of other funds, Ken Feinberg and Camille Byras. They're real experts at this, and they gave us great advice and, again, turned us around in a number of places on how to design this with the goal of maximizing participation. The second source of input was the community. So in September, we put out a draft form of the program, knowing that for sure we didn't have it all right, but we wanted to move quickly, particularly being mindful of the fact that under current federal law, proceeds from a settlement become taxable after the end of the year. So we wanted to get something out as quickly as possible to see if we could get as many victims as possible to go through the process before this becomes taxable. We put out those draft materials in September, opened it up to the community, held something like a dozen different workshops open to the community members. Separately, Ken and Camille, the 9/11 experts, held their own sessions with plaintiffs' attorneys with no Edison people in the room. And they reported back the input from that. We received over 1,000 distinct pieces of input. And out of that, we made over 50 changes between the initial draft and the final form that we published in October. So I want to say thank you to everybody who participated, because you helped shape this program and make it better.
Well, and you've talked about it actually increased how many folks are eligible.
Absolutely. So the initial eligibility was based on something called DINS maps that CAL FIRE produces of impacted properties. Programs eligible to both residential and commercial businesses, and we have all the eligibility criteria on the website, sce.com/direct claims, by the way. And so the initial number was just upwards of 12,000 eligible properties. One of the really big pieces of input we got, probably the most substantial change that the DINS map we had used from that, simply did not cover enough homes that may not have had any direct fire damage, but that had smoke and ash damage. And so we added around 55 or 5,600 more properties with likely smoke and ash damage, bringing the total eligible properties to over 18,250.
That's huge, because so many people we talk to who are in that situation where they have smoke damage to their home, some of them they still haven't been able to go home because they're still fighting with their insurance companies over how much of that remediation and testing is covered. Who else is eligible? People who maybe lost work because of this?
So it's both homeowners and renters, tenants, long-term tenants in eligible properties. It does not include short-term rentals, but it does include long-term, so your typical renters. It includes various kinds of damages. It can be full loss of a home or a business property, partial damage, smoke and ash damage, as I mentioned already. For commercial entities, can include some of the business interruption damages. It includes economic damages as well as non-economic damages. And you'll see on the website it specifies out the various categories that are covered. And then it also includes a premium for participating in the program. This premium would not be available through normal litigation. It's an incentive to participate through this program, but also recognition that it is model-based. It may not include everything that somebody thinks maybe should be included. So by providing this extra premium that can also cover some of those costs, as well as costs that are not allowed for recovery in litigation under California law. One example of that is care for pets. There's specific categories there that typically haven't been supported by the courts. So providing that extra premium, which as an example, and we provided several scenarios on the website of kinds of, example victims and what the payouts might be. The one that sticks at the top of my mind is a 1,500 square foot residential home owned by the folks living there, 2 adults, 2 children, and I think it had one attached structure like a garage or an ADU. And in that case, the model produces a recovery of just over $2 million. Now, in this example, we're also assuming that that home was insured with $1 million policy. That will be netted out. And so the net proceeds that they would receive would be just over $1 million, including that $200,000 direct claims premium. And by the way, the reason that insurance gets netted out is that ultimately the California Earthquake Authority, which is the administrator of the wildfire fund from which most of these amounts will come, right? All of it after we exceed our $1 billion insurance. They want to make sure that there aren't double payments flowing out. And the problem with double payments would be that would use up the fund more quickly. That's been funded half by customers, and that would leave less there to help folks with their net needs after insurance.
And is that the same from a potential lawsuit that would also be netted out?
So it probably depends on how the lawsuit is structured. You're taking me beyond.
I know we're not lawyers.
A dumb PhD, not a lawyer here. So, but yeah, in general, I think you see also often in lawsuits you might also see the lawsuit then expanding and the insurance carrier being involved in the middle of it, and that'll being figured out in the settlement. For the purposes of this program, again, a lot of the design basis was let's create something that's straightforward and fast so we can help people move a lot more quickly than through litigation. They still have the litigation option, and we respect that. One of the criticisms that some people have thrown at this has been, well, you're trying to do a one-size-fits-all. That's not true. This is, I would call it many sizes to fit most, but we know that it won't fit everybody. We know that there are properties that are not eligible today because these properties might be outside of the design basis, the assumptions for the model. So we understand that there will be cases where, unfortunately, litigation may end up being the only avenue. We are looking, based on the feedback that we've gotten in the most recent town halls. And I had a couple people come up to me and explain their situation. Maybe they were in a pocket of homes that experienced significant damage, but that was outside of the area that we had drawn. So I have asked our team to go back and see if there are additional pockets of eligibility that we should be picking up to try and help as many people as possible within the parameters that this model can cover. But again, it's not going to fit everybody, but we think it has multiple sizes there to fit many or maybe even most.
A lot of folks are still wrangling with their insurance. So as part of this process, if they're going to get started, do they need to know the insurance amount they're going to get?
No. And that's another benefit of just deducting the entire claim amount. Now, we recognize that means that still leaves the homeowner or the renter or the business in that dialogue, sometimes debate with their insurance carrier. But again, in order to construct something that was applicable across as many cases as possible, and that didn't have the possibility of double counting, double payment, that would then mean that the California Earthquake Authority would not be able to support it. It was just most straightforward for us to be outside of the insurance picture. We net out the entire policy, and the insured person works through with their insurance carrier. This program is then providing everything net of that or in addition to that insurance policy. We're trying to do our part here. We also expect insurance companies to do their part and to honor their obligations to victims under insurance policies fairly. And so that's really important. And again, we encourage the insurance community to do their part.
Anyone can go online and look exactly what factors are going into this, but can you give us some idea of what's feeding into that $2 million number. You
In
gave the
that case,
example.
in
Yeah.
that case, right. And again, there's several scenarios that we have on the website. I think around half a dozen scenarios, a homeowner, a renter, a business, so that individuals can get more of a sense of, hey, this case maybe looks more like my situation. That might give me a ballpark sense. Part of the feedback that we got, by the way, from the community was, well, sure would be nice if we had a calculator that can estimate what it's going to be, up front. Because of what you just asked about, there's multiple factors that go into the model. I'll talk about this in a second. That's why we haven't found a way to provide a quick estimator that would be sufficiently accurate to actually help folks. One of the good things that we're seeing so far, though, is that with the claims that have been submitted, the average time that it's taken to fill out the form has been around an hour. So it's not a big investment of time to participate and to check it out. Okay, factors that go into the model, and give me a little more background there. The underlying engine was developed by a company called Compass Lexicon. And so they have this broad model that takes things like, ultimately what it's doing is looking at the pre-fire versus post-fire values of properties. Inside that, it's looking at locations, square feet, et cetera. Right? So particulars around what was that property, what attributes did it have, how large was it, and what location, and developing an estimate based on that. They had a standard model at Compass Lexicon. We asked them to open the hood and tune the engine, as it were, or tune the electric motors, because we like electric vehicles better, so that it could be more customized for the Altadena and surrounding communities. Since we asked them to tune it, I was concerned about whether the community would be concerned about how was that tuned and, was that done fairly, et cetera. So we then engaged the RAND Corporation. Many of your listeners will recognize them. They're based in Santa Monica. They're globally recognized as, it's almost like an academic institution and very independent. Southern California, Edison did pay them for their time, but guaranteed that they could do their work fully independently. And their job was to then go in and validate the approach that Compass Lexicon took and look at the results. What they determined, paraphrasing it a little bit, was the report is available in public, so you can see that there. But they concluded that it's a very good statistical model. It works as well as any model might be expected to work, in this kind of case. Like any statistical model, it works well across a large number of cases, but not for all cases. And in fact, they concluded that the overall model will tend to overcompensate homes that had, or properties that had, lower pre-fire values on the lower end, and tends to undercompensate properties that were on the upper end of pre-fire values. That's why it's so important, in our view, to not just have this fast-paced 90-day process that's based exclusively on the model, but to also have the detailed review option, so that if you have one of your listeners who thinks that they may be in one of those ends, if they're in the lower end and they're getting overcompensated, they're done. It probably makes a lot of sense to take that offer. If they're on the other side where they think they may have been undercompensated, then they have the ability to go into the longer, detailed review process. Our intent here has been to provide fair compensation, all right? So that people don't think that by doing this, are they leaving behind a lot of value that they might get otherwise in litigation.
Right.
That's been our intent.
That's the calculus, right?
That's the calculus.
Because time and money, those are the two things that fire survivors are going to be looking at, which is, if I'm rebuilding, maybe I need the money now so I can get the process going. Or do I wait, join a lawsuit, because I'm sure the lawyers are telling people that they'll be able to get them more.
Some are. And look, I'm going to be super open here. We recognize, we read, we read the...
you read the comments.
The news too. We read the comments. We read, the newspaper articles. And so I talked earlier about, we're trying to do the right thing here for the community. I need to look my neighbors in the eye and say, hey, we've done everything we can to do right by you. I said earlier, I hope that insurance companies will also do the right thing, right, and honor their obligations fairly. And similarly, I expect that plaintiffs' attorneys will follow the ethical rules for the law, for lawyers, and counsel their clients on what may be best for them. And I recognize that This approach may not work for everybody, but at a minimum, there's no cost. Check it out. And if you use an attorney, again, as I mentioned earlier, you'll even get a 10% premium on your net claims in order to help support your attorney fees. Now, I also hope that if someone is using an attorney and the fast pay process worked for them, that will require very little work on the part of the attorney. I sure hope that attorney is not going to turn around and charge 30 or 40% fees.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up, because when we did the episode on Paradise, which was destroyed by the campfire, which was found to have been caused by PG&E equipment, I asked the leaders in Paradise how that lawsuit factored into the recovery. And they said it was actually really disappointing because people were forced to wait because they were waiting to see what kind of settlement they would get and whether or not that would allow them to rebuild. The settlement took years.
Yeah.
And then once people finally saw the amount, in some instances, the lawyers took 30%.
That's one of the main drivers in our wanting to set up this program, and especially the fast pay portion, to do our part in trying to get people the compensation much more quickly than they otherwise would through litigation. I should also point out there, Kate, that since you brought up Paradise, some really important differences between that situation and this one. And in the case of the campfire, the litigation process for that was also intertwined with the PG&E bankruptcy. A trust fund was set up that was approved as part of the bankruptcy plan of reorganization. And that had a preset amount of funding in it. And that capped the amounts that could go to victims. Very different situation here. First, we have the benefit of state law AB 1054, which was passed in 2019. That law did three important things. It set up the requirements for wildfire mitigation plans for investor-owned utilities so we can continue to make our communities safer through all the work we're doing to harden the grid and other measures. Secondly, it established its wildfire fund that we've talked about. And then thirdly, the fund funded half by customers, half by shareholders. It was set up to be nominally a $21 billion fund. It's paid out some claims for the Kincaid and Dixie fires in PG&E's area. But even after looking at that, because there's also been investment gains in the fund, the California Earthquake Authority estimates there's a $22 billion capacity remaining in that fund for the Eaton fire. We don't have an estimate.
Is that enough? Because you've seen some of these quotes that the damage could be like $40 billion, I saw in one story.
So we don't know yet, and what we've said in our financial disclosures is that we don't have the ability to estimate yet what it could be. One caveat, as you look at some of those numbers, some of those may include amounts that are impacts to the broad economy, but that typically you wouldn't see recovered through litigation or through settlements.
All right. Well, thank you for spelling all that out. I want to get into more how we got here in the first place.
Sure.
But first, let's take a quick break.
During one of the most severe windstorms Southern California experienced in more than a decade, the Palisades and Eaton fires ignited, leaving heartbreaking losses in our communities. Now, as we build back, we're building stronger, cleaner, and more resilient. In communities most vulnerable to dangerous weather conditions and wildfires, Southern California Edison is placing power lines underground, hardening the electric system by installing wires with protective coating, and adding advanced technology to help keep communities safe. So when Southern California faces the next storm, the next most severe event, we'll be ready. Learn more at sce.com/disaster recovery. And if you were impacted by the Eaton fire, you may qualify for direct compensation through Southern California Edison's Wildfire Recovery Compensation Program. File your claim directly with no legal fees, no litigation, and receive payment in months, not years. To file and learn more, visit sce.com/directclaims.
It used to be that America could do big things. We built the interstate highway system. We did NASA. We built housing all over the country. We built enormous water systems and dams. We're not building big things anymore.
Mark Dunkelman's recent book, Why Nothing Works, examines why it is so difficult to build the critical infrastructure we need. From convoluted laws to overlapping regulations, Dunkelman looks at why the building of public infrastructure is more difficult here than in other developed countries.
We built up a series of checks within the system that now are so oppressive that even when someone comes with a good project that almost no one can object to, someone will find an objection.
Rebuild SoCal Partnership met Dunkelman at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island, to talk about the infrastructure needs of California and the nation, and how government reform can make public decision-making more efficient. To dive deep into the conversation, stay tuned for the end of the episode.
We're back with Pedro Pizarro of Edison International. So the official investigation into the cause of the Eaton fire is not finished. We have not had CAL FIRE come forward and officially say that Edison equipment was to blame. But the leading theory is that it started from a, quote, idle, unconnected transmission line in Eaton Canyon. Without getting too technical, can you explain how that's possible? It wasn't connected?
Yeah. So that's correct. It's a line that was out of service from around 1971, if I recall correctly. We have, or SCE has, something like 465 miles of idle lines currently across the system. So first question you probably ask is why? And the reason is that when a line is not needed at that point, there are a couple choices. You can either dismantle it immediately, or you can save it for potential future use. Sometimes you might have reuse of the actual equipment itself. Sometimes you need the equipment to sit there dormant, idle, still inspected, it's not abandoned. But that allows the company to preserve easement rights, legal rights to have that line there if it's on land that is not SCE's owned land.
But this case, there was a parallel line that was connected right there, right?
But I was just explaining, this is why there's idle lines. And by the way, this line had a sister line that sat idle for decades, and then about 10 years ago was reused. Some of the towers from 1924 were in great shape, and they were reused for the Tehachapi transmission system that today imports about 4,500 megawatts of renewables from Tehachapi. All right, this line. So it's sitting there, it's idle. It was grounded at both ends. And it has there's an energized transmission line or a set of lines about 50 or 60 feet away. There's something called induction. I'm going to take you back to your, junior year high school physics class.
Right.
And induction is essentially the way that your phone can charge from a wireless charger. You don't have any electrical connection there. But what's happening is that you have a magnetic field, right? When you have current flowing through a piece of wire, there's an associated electromagnetic field. If that magnetic field is moving, it's oscillating, like alternating current does, and you have a piece of metal sitting in the field, that constant movement of the magnetic field lines induces electrons to move, to flow in the adjacent piece of wire. End of the physics lesson.
So how far would it have to jump?
So it's not jumping. It's, again, think of it as you're in that field, and the fact that you have a piece of metal there, you'll have electrons moving. This is a known physical, quality. That's why that line was grounded at both ends, so that if electrons started moving, they would find a path to ground. By the way, there's no standard in the industry for this. We're aware of at least one or two utilities that have idle lines that are not grounded. Edison had a policy of grounding at both ends to prevent an accident, from induction, if that were to happen. Now, what happened on January 7th, and this is what's behind our hypothesis that this idle line might have been at issue. There was a fault, a spike on the transmission system about 5 to 12 miles away from this idle line.
Right.
And a fault, this could have been, remember, you had up to 100-mile-an-hour winds, maybe 60, 70 miles at the moment. We don't know what caused that fault. It could have been material blowing into the lines. It could have been something else. But in any case, there was a voltage spike. We have protective equipment in our system such that if there's a spike that happens that goes over a certain amount, that will de-energize the lines, or, protect the equipment. It's like the GFCI outlet in your bathroom, right? That has a little pop-out switch.
Yes.
All right. And if you have your hair dryer, don't drop it in the sink. But if it falls in the sink and contacts water, that button will pop out. It'll turn off the circuit. This is analogous. That voltage spike that happened was not large enough to trip the protective equipment. So they didn't present a safety issue for the rest of the energized transmission system. Now, the voltage spike was seen across the entire transmission network, not just at Edison, but I think all across the West. And so it triggered, voltage spike on the other transmission line that was connected to it that was adjacent to the idle line. So the hypothesis is that somehow when that voltage spike went through, that increased the amount of induction on the idle line. And then perhaps there was something that went wrong with the grounds that were attached to that idle line. And perhaps then that led somehow, we don't know how, to creating a spark on the equipment. What we do know is that there's video of fire starting around one of these transmission towers. So there's a lot of focus on the equipment on that tower. But we have not been able to conclude what the mechanism could have been that could have led to that. But again, we're saying, look, we recognize there's all the circumstantial evidence. We don't see another probable cause. We're moving forward. We're setting up this wildfire recovery compensation program, and we are just going to move ahead with helping the community recover from this.
Just in summary, so the evidence is this fault on the line,
Yep.
and then the videos that we've seen of the fire underneath the tower, and there was no evidence that anyone was up there that night that could have started a fire.
Haven't seen any other probable cause to date.
I'm curious because SCE did a power safety shutoff that night.
Yep.
People were sitting at their homes in the dark, but not in Eaton Canyon.
Right. Actually, there were some distribution lines, lower voltage lines that were de-energized nearby. Let me take a minute to explain how public safety power shutoffs work. They are meant to reduce wildfire risk, but we recognize they create other risks because traffic lights are out, power is out to homes that need it. There's lots of other risks that you create with that. And so we have protocols that we review with our regulators around when and how do we take public safety power shutoffs. And they're based on modeling of what's the risk of ignition and what's the risk of consequence from that ignition in any given area. Distribution lines are the lower voltage lines you might see going adjacent to people's houses. They're also lighter lines. So they face higher risk at a given wind speed than a transmission line. Those are heavier. They're spread much more widely apart. And so the criteria for the energizing transmission is higher than for the energizing distribution lines. And so that night, there were distribution lines that triggered the need for the energization. They were taken out, but those transmission lines had not hit their threshold criteria.
Despite the 100-mile-an-hour winds.
Well, at the time of ignition, we did not have 100-mile-an-hour winds yet, and I don't think those were fully forecast. The winds that were forecast then and that were being experienced in real time were not sufficient to trigger the energization of the transmission lines. And what's interesting here, Kate, again, is that there's risk on both sides of this. I mean, you've seen the articles, and I understand them. I appreciate the real pain that people feel. There's the question of, well, what if we had had more de-energization? Could you have prevented, this incident? On the other side, every year we go through and we review our wildfire mitigation practices. SCE files a revised wildfire mitigation plan annually. In addition to that normal annual process, after Eaton, after this horrible, heartbreaking catastrophe in our neighborhood, right, we set up a whole other team, standalone team, to go through and look at everything around wildfire mitigation. What do our models look like? What are the public safety power shutoff criteria? How should we be looking at grounding idle lines?
I understand with the power safety shutoffs, the damned if you do, damned if you don't aspect of that.
Yeah.
To me, the sticky point is this idle line that hadn't been used since America was fighting Vietnam. When you say that you have over 400 miles of idle line, you are changing the way that you address that infrastructure, right?
We're always looking at how we can improve and how do we learn. And those lines all get inspected annually, and as issues arise, they get corrected. Now, let me acknowledge, I wish we could be perfect. We could never be perfect. We only have 13,500 team members covering 50,000 square miles of territory. Just one metric alone, we have 750,000 transformers alone. It's not an excuse, but it's just wanting to explain to your listeners the reality that the expectation for regulated utilities across the country is that safety has to come first. We are heavily regulated, but mistakes will happen. Things will get overlooked. We look at how our processes are prudent, and that means recognizing that because mistakes can happen when you have human beings, we haven't all been replaced by AI bots, right? Because mistakes can happen, we have quality control processes. We have checks on all of that. We'll do samples of, hey, this line was inspected. Was it inspected correctly? If it was not, what happened? How do we fix the process? So that's prudency. Now, to your question, 465 miles of idle lines, that's spread out across a couple hundred plus circuits. They are in place, as I said earlier, because that is a better value proposition ultimately for the customer in terms of delaying removal cost. And if we can preserve the ability to build a line in a specific location by maintaining an idle line in place, by keeping those permits active, we're going to be saving customers a lot of money if we can reuse those lines or at least reuse their area.
Should this idle line have been taken down given its proximity to a charged line?
No. That's why that line was grounded on both ends. One ground should have been sufficient. Again, we're still trying to understand what happened here, if indeed the fire was started by the line. What we are doing, though, Kate, is learning from this experience and becoming even more conservative. Again, I mentioned there are utilities that don't even ground idle lines that are near energized lines. Our practice was to ground at both ends. Now, that's not sufficient. Now we ground at least every 2 miles. And if we see that the topography of a line requires more, we'll do that as well. We've also gone back and reviewed, to your question, a number of lines that are especially close to energized lines to really double and triple test, do we really think that that line has future value? And if, assumptions change, you learn as neighborhoods are changing, et cetera, as we add other lines throughout our system, maybe an area that could have had lots of future value now has less future value because of the way our system has grown. So we've reviewed a number of lines, and we may remove a small number of lines from service and remove them entirely where we see that things have changed and they don't have that future optionality value.
Last question on this point
Sure.
comes from the lawsuit from the federal government. Prosecutors are alleging the fire was caused by, their words, a troubling pattern of negligence, and that one of the goals of this lawsuit is cultural change at Edison.
So I appreciate that that's a lawsuit, and of course we'll respond to legal channels. Let me tell you what we have said about that. First and foremost, if you look in our financial disclosures, which is how we speak to our investors, our owners, and we need to be very confident of what we say there. We have said since the Eaton fire that as we investigated this further, we remain confident that SCE will be able to make a good faith showing that it was a reasonable operator of our system, a prudent operator of the system. And so we have been transparent with the public. I mean, within the first few days after Eaton, I went in front of cameras and pledged to the community that as we found out more details, we would share them. And I think you've seen us do that. Early on, we saw, for example, that, as I told you, that idle line was grounded at both ends. But we saw that inspections may have missed some defects with one set of grounds, the set of grounds farthest away from the potential ignition source, that shows up in photos from before the fire, from those inspections, but may have been missed by the inspector as he or she was going through and reviewing, a number of other lines. We've been transparent about that. We have worked hard over many years to put safety first. We are transparent with the commission, with the public when we have issues. And so we know that there's always room for improvement, but, we would reject that kind of broad accusation that my teammates are simply negligent. That's just not how we operate, Kate.
Well, and I appreciate you being here and taking these questions because you could be hiding behind the threat of litigation and say we're not going to talk at all.
No, I couldn't be hiding because I'm a member of this community and I owe it to my neighbors.
Let's take a quick break and then talk about where we go from here.
Yeah.
Hi, my name's Jordan and I'm a producer at LA Times Studios. I'm here to talk to you a little bit about our new sponsor, Ollie. Like many dog owners, my dog Zooms has become like a child to me, and with that type of responsibility comes the constant need to keep them happy and healthy. One way I make her mealtime a little bit better is through Ollie. Ollie delivers clean, fresh nutrition in 5 drool-worthy flavors, even for the pickiest eaters. Made in U.S. kitchens with the highest quality, human-grade ingredients, Ollie's food contains no fillers, no preservatives, just real food. And here's the thing, healthier food means a happier pup. More energy, shinier coats, better poops, and more excitement at mealtime. Fill out Ollie's 30-second quiz and they'll create a customized meal plan based on your pup's weight, activity level, and other health info. For any first-timers, Ollie will send out your pup's first box with 2 weeks worth of meals, a free storage container for mess-free serving, and a guide of how to gradually switch them over to their new diet. Dogs deserve the best, and that means fresh, healthy food. Head to ollie.com/rebuildingla, tell them all about your dog, and use code RebuildingLA to get 60% off your welcome kit. Plus, they offer a happiness guarantee on the first box, so if you're not completely satisfied, you'll get your money back. That's OLLIE.com/rebuildingLA and enter code RebuildingLA to get 60% off your first box.
All right, we are back with Pedro Pizarro of Edison International. SoCal Edison, you talked about the fact this is a company that is 120 years old.
Nearly 140.
Nearly 140.
But I guess we look good.
Yeah.
120. Oh, we're nearly 140 years old, Kate.
The climate is changing. The worst wildfires we've seen have all happened in the last decade. So the threat, the potential damage caused by a single spark at the wrong moment and the wrong season is just exponentially different now versus what it was 25 years ago. How are you thinking about that going forward? Because as you said, you can never get down to a 0% risk. But now, I mean, the potential for devastation is so high.
Yeah. There's so much in that question, Kate. Let me start here. California has always had fires. As long as you can go back in the historical record. But in 2017, we saw a magnitude of fire that nobody had ever forecast. And that's been the convergence of a number of factors. Climate change is definitely one of them. But you also have just more infrastructure, more lives at risk in higher fire risk areas. My wife grew up in Southern California. She has this memory when they lived in Tujunga, and she probably was around 7 or 8, I think, when there was a fire that came right up to their house because they lived at the edge of Tujunga at the time. Their backyard, I think, went up into National Forest. And she has this memory of her dad spending all night on the roof with a garden hose and saving their home. But that was a forest fire. It kind of came up close, but it was a forest fire because back then it was the forest, very few people lived there. Today we don't talk about the forest fires. We talk about broader wildfires at the wildland-urban interface. Real estate is expensive in Southern California and throughout California, and so we've seen more and more development going up high-risk canyons, going deep into high fire risk areas. Today, Southern California Edison serves 50,000 square miles throughout California, about 15 million residents, something like 40% of California. 27% of that 50,000 square miles is classified as high fire risk officially by the government, and that number will probably go up over the years. 3 or 4 years ago, we put out a white paper called Adapting for Tomorrow. There, our team took the global climate models and used them to forecast climate-related impacts in California out in 2050. And we see that average sea level will rise, which means more damage during storms, right? Because storm surge will go deeper inland. We see that there'll be a lot more extreme heat. The top 1% hot days today will be 7 times more prevalent and hotter. More floods and droughts, both. It's about extremes and volatility. On wildfires, forecasting 20% more acres burned every year in 2050 than today due to wildfires from all kinds of ignitions, all ignition sources. Today, about 10% of ignitions are utility related. So we know that the risk is going to get worse. Add to that the fact that we're an electric company. We have an obligation to serve, not an option, an obligation to serve everyone everywhere. We have wires that go through that 27% of high fire risk areas. And so you said it really well. A spark can have dramatic consequences that differ depending on what's going on with weather and where it happens. Our focus has been on reducing risk. All of the wildfire mitigation that we've done, beginning in 2017 when we started redesigning the airplane in flight, we give you an example. We have 17,000 miles of distribution wire in our high fire risk areas. In 2017, 7,000 of those miles were already underground. They were newer, built that way. 10,000 were bare overhead wire. Today, over 6,800 of those 10,000 miles have already been replaced, mile by mile, with insulated wire, covered conductor. Think of it as coated wire, so that if a palm front blows into that line during a windstorm, it won't have any impact. And to date, we have not seen a single ignition on covered conductor miles caused by the elements that it's meant to mitigate. So that's been a transformation in a short 7 or 8 years here. But we know the risk will never be zero. And so when you take a look at a catastrophic fire, regardless of where the spark comes from, whether it's utility equipment, whether it's a drunk driver hitting a pole, whether it's a campfire that goes out of control, that alone is not the catastrophe. Let's talk about Eaton. It was 100-mile-an-hour winds. That means embers were moving 1.5 miles a minute. It was the 100-mile-an-hour winds grounding firefighting aircraft at a critical early time in the fire. It was sadly evacuation notices that appear not to have gone out west of Lake Avenue, the area that had all but one of these horrible fatalities.
Right.
Each one of those is an individual story that's painful. And it was also, and this is not the fault of our residents, I want to be clear about that, but it's a community where the homes were not prepared for wildfire. And that's a state responsibility ultimately. That's why
Are you talking about brush clearance?
I mean, a number of things. Right? We know that none of us should have flammable vegetation in our landscaping within 6 or 8 feet of our home. It's the materials that are used for the home. Now, that can lead to very expensive retrofits, but it's also more affordable stuff like requiring gutter guards, right? Screens that can help prevent embers from going into the attic. That might be a few $100s, for each home. And so, again, this is not an issue of the residents themselves, but as a state, we need to grapple with the fact that we face this risk. We have more and more homes in wildfire-prone areas. That wildfire risk will increase, and we need to make those structures safer.
I want to ask you about cost to customers. I heard you say earlier this year that about 10% of a customer's electricity bill is due to fire mitigation efforts.
Yep.
Given the catastrophe that happened in January and the urgent need to do more going forward, are people going to see their electric bills go up?
So, and acknowledge SCE just got approval of a general rate increase that was a above inflation large increase going from 2024 into 2025. However, we now see future rate increases from this point moving forward being at inflation levels between 2% and 3%. So this clean energy transition will actually help customer affordability.
You talked about putting lines underground. What's being done in Altadena and the Pacific Palisades where it comes to that right now?
Yeah, we've accelerated already existing undergrounding plans and have added undergrounding plans as well. So in Altadena, there's already 2 miles that have gone underground out of a plan to add over 60 miles of undergrounding there. So good progress. Similarly, in the Palisades, adding significant undergrounding. I will say this is an area where we need collaboration, particularly from government in siting and permitting, and we've been really pleased LA County's engagement in that. We need to continue that because siting and permitting is the biggest challenge as we deploy new infrastructure.
It's a costly effort, but do you see the true benefit in that over time?
Yeah, absolutely. And SCE has taken a very measured approach at where we propose undergrounding and where we do not. And a lot of our area is grasslands and chaparrals, so the primary cause of ignitions in the past has been stuff blowing into overhead lines. That can be mitigated by using that insulated wire I talked about earlier, the coated wire. at much lower cost. It might cost us, I think today, about $600,000 or $700,000 per mile for a typical bare wire mile. It might cost us around $900,000 per mile for covered conductor. Undergrounding can cost anywhere between $1.5 million and $4.5–5 million a mile.
Wow.
So we want it to be very targeted in where we focus undergrounding efforts. And for us, one example would be in a community that has limited egress. Say a mountain community that has one road in and out.
Yeah.
The consequence of fire there can be so dire that that's a strong candidate for using undergrounding instead of covered conductor.
Human life.
Human life.
Well, thank you so much for your time and candor today. You didn't have to be here, and we just really appreciate it. So thank you.
Kate, thanks for having me. It was the right thing to do, and we owe it to our community, and happy to engage anytime.
All right. Thank you so much. That's Edison International CEO Pedro Pizarro. We have the details about the Edison compensation plan on our show page. You can find that anywhere you get your podcasts. You can also watch us on YouTube. As always, thank you for listening. Now a word from our sponsor.
The following is a paid message from Rebuild SoCal Partnership. Sponsor has no editorial oversight.
Mark Dunkelman is a fellow in international and public affairs at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island. In his recent book, Why Nothing Works, he explores the barriers to building the infrastructure that could match the scale of what we need as a country. Dunkelman sat down with John Switalski, Executive Director of Rebuild SoCal Partnership, to talk about our response to the devastating fires and the policies we need to rebuild efficiently.
The title of your book is provocative, Why Nothing Works. Can you tell us what isn't working and why not?
It used to be that America could do big things. We built the interstate highway system. We did NASA. We built housing all over the country. We built enormous water systems and dams. We're not building big things anymore. That's because we've created a system where there are so many vetoes. No one has the authority to sort of say, here are a whole bunch of costs and benefits to doing this big thing. I will weigh them against each other and make a decision. And that's because of reforms that we've made basically since the 1960s and 1970s.
In Los Angeles, we are now rebuilding in the communities of Altadena and Pacific Palisades. We hear that the cleanup is being done efficiently. Does it seem like that kind of efficiency is only done in time of emergency?
The other major example of that is rebuilding of 95 in Pennsylvania after it collapsed. There was a moment in time when people with too much discretionary power abused it and did things to people who were powerless that were outrageous, but we've now overcorrected. And so in too many cases, absent a crisis, you've got a situation where it's almost impossible to get good projects done.
A central critique in your book is how we approach infrastructure as a society. Why is that?
We built up a series of checks within the system that now are so oppressive that even when someone comes with a good project that almost no one can object to, someone will find an objection. Because at root, our movement is the one that wants to do big things for working people, and we're not able to accomplish that. So we're culpable for our own frustration.
You argue in your book that people don't like concentration of power. Can you talk about how that impacts infrastructure?
And then we got to a point in the 1960s, 1970s, where we saw that the people who had been empowered to make decisions were making bad decisions. The lesson that progressives took from that was that powerful individuals couldn't be trusted. But if you're going to do a big project, there are going to be costs and benefits, and someone needs to be able to weigh them. We need to make it so that everyone has a voice, but that no one has a veto.
What happens to a society that can no longer build what it needs?
We're in a situation right now where we can't build what needs to be built. We were in a similar situation at the turn of the 20th century. Corporate titans and robber barons, and they stopped projects from happening. And eventually, the public interest rose up and said, no, we're going to empower someone to make these decisions. But the core elements are the same. We've got too many vetoes in the system. And if we're going to get things done, we're going to need to empower someone to make these decisions.
We are going through a period of government reform in Southern California. What advice can you give to streamline the bureaucracy?
Even if I don't get the outcome that I want, what would be a process that would make me feel as though my concerns were heard and I will accept the outcome at the end of the day. As we re-engage the public and they see that the government does work, there will be sort of a virtuous cycle of people saying, I understand how that worked. I can imagine giving government power to do more in the future. We need to set up systems through charter changes, through changes of law, through changes in the way we do litigation that make it clearer to people who ultimately has the power to choose.
What new story do we need to tell so that people realize that infrastructure projects can be built and have a positive impact on their lives?
The projects to clean up parts of Southern California that burned 6 months ago, that's an efficient, effective use of public power. And that people see that as the norm. The people that they look to solve those problems are efficient, effective government bureaucracies that can get through all the objections and get us to the best outcome. And so I think that's a slow process of our rediscovering the power of government to do good.
What are the costs of infrastructures in other modern countries compared to the United States?
What's so remarkable in the United States is that our infrastructure is orders of magnitude more expensive than other places that are also developed. The distinction is about the process we use to make decisions, these soft costs, and it's something that we really need to grapple with.
We're cleaning up the fires in LA, we're rebuilding. What general advice do you have?
LA's going through this torturous period where you're trying to rebuild from these devastating fires. And the challenge for us now is to say, in a moment of deep communal need, can we have the wherewithal to make decisions expeditiously? And ultimately, most everyone has the community's best interest in mind, but people have different ideas about the way moving forward. And the thing that you need is ultimately to have someone be able to make the decision of which way we're going to go.
Rebuilding LA is hosted and reported on by me, Kate Cagle. Our senior producer and showrunner is Megan Larson. Our associate producers are Jordan Patterson and Megan Botel. Our camera operators are Michael Siegel, Carter Wells, and Peter Grayson. Our director of post-production is Patrick Stewart, and our senior sound recording engineer is Nick Norton, with audio engineering help from David Iskandarian and motion graphics by Dougal Henkin. Our video editors are Daniel Flesher, Michael Ray, and Peter Grayson. Ben Church is our senior coordinating producer. Our podcast marketing manager is Bryn Jura, and our product marketing director is Becca Dorman. Our general counsel at the Los Angeles Times is Jeff Glasser. Special thanks to President and Chief Operating Officer of the Los Angeles Times, Chris Argentieri, and the Executive Editor of the Los Angeles Times, Terry Tang. And one final thank you to all the residents of Altadena, Malibu, and the Pacific Palisades for sharing your stories with us. Rebuilding LA is co-created by LA Times Studios President Anna Magzanian and executive produced and co-created by Darius Derrickson.